Have you been praying the Lord's Prayer wrong? What if one of the most famous prayers in history, the Lord's Prayer, has been spoken by millions for centuries, yet most of us have been missing its true meaning? Imagine repeating sacred words every day without unlocking the power they were meant to release in your life. The truth is, the Lord's Prayer is not just a string of memorized lines. It is a divine blueprint designed by Jesus himself to align your heart with heaven, to reset your spirit every morning, and to shield your soul against the unseen battles of the day. When you say it without reflection, it becomes ritual. But when you say it with understanding, it becomes revelation. That's why today, we are going to uncover how this prayer was meant to be prayed and how it can transform not only your words, but your entire spiritual walk. If you stay with me, you will never approach this prayer the same way again, because its power will move from your lips into your life. The hidden power of our Father. The first words of the Lord's Prayer carry a depth that most people overlook, yet they are the very foundation of everything that follows. When you say Our Father, you are not reciting a phrase for formality. You are making a declaration that shifts the way you see yourself, the way you see God, and the way you see the world around you. Those two words are heavy with identity, belonging, intimacy, and security. And if you understand them, the entire prayer takes on new power. To call God Father is to recognize that He is not a distant being to be feared in silence, but a present Father who knows you, cares for you, and desires relationship with you. This is not the voice of someone begging for the attention of a king hidden behind palace walls. This is the voice of a child speaking directly to the one who created all things, yet still bends down to listen. Every time you pray, Our Father, you are stepping into an assurance that the Creator of the universe is not only powerful but personal, not only sovereign but near, not only holy but loving. Think for a moment about the word our. It changes everything. Jesus did not say, My Father, when teaching this prayer, although He had every right to do so as the Son of God. He chose the word our because He wanted every believer, every follower, every person who would ever utter these words to understand that faith is not isolated. It is not an individual exercise disconnected from the world. It is family. When you pray our, you are joining your voice with millions of others across time, culture, and place. You are connected to the body of believers around the globe, and you are reminded that you belong. You are not alone in your struggle, not alone in your journey, not alone in your prayer. The moment you say our, you step into unity. Your prayer becomes part of a chorus of voices that rise together before the throne of heaven. And that unity has power, because Scripture tells us that where two or three are gathered in His name, He is there among them. How much more powerful when the entire body of Christ whispers the same words. Now consider the word Father. That one word is radical. In the time of Jesus, calling God Father was not common. Many saw Him as too holy, too distant, too majestic to be addressed in such personal terms. Yet Jesus teaches us that God desires to be known this way. He is not merely a force, not just a ruler, not a faceless deity. He is Father, and not just any Father, but a perfect one. When you say Father, you are reminded that you are not abandoned. You are not a servant begging for scraps. You are a child sitting at the table. You are cared for, watched over, and loved with an everlasting love. Every fear you carry, every burden you hold, is seen by Him. He is not indifferent. He is not silent. He is not distant. He is Father. This is why those first two words matter so much. If you rush through them, you miss the foundation of the entire prayer. Everything else that follows flows from this relationship. When you pray Our Father, you step into identity. You root yourself in belonging. You affirm that you are loved, and you acknowledge that God is near. Without this awareness, prayer feels empty. With it, prayer becomes alive, filled with confidence and intimacy. And this is exactly where many people have been praying the Lord's Prayer wrong. They recite it without realizing who they are speaking to. They say the words without the revelation that the God of heaven bends His ear to listen like a father listens to a child. That is the mistake that drains the prayer of power. But when you pause, when you let the weight of Our Father sink in, the words ignite. They stop being habit and become revelation. Think about how different your prayer life would be if every time you said, "Our Father," you pictured him leaning close, listening intently, ready to respond. Imagine how your fear would diminish if you started your day with the reminder that you are a child of the Almighty. Imagine how your loneliness would fade if you truly believed that you belong to a family that spans nations and centuries. Imagine how your anxiety would calm if you grasped that the same God who set galaxies in place calls himself your Father. That is the power of these words. They are not a polite introduction. They are the doorway into a new reality. And here is the challenge. Do not allow yourself to recite these words mechanically ever again. The next time you begin the Lord's Prayer, pause. Say, "Our Father," slowly. Let each word rest in your heart. Let "our" remind you that you belong. Let "Father" remind you that you are loved. Feel the shift as your prayer ceases to be ritual and becomes relationship. This is where the prayer begins, not with empty words, but with identity and intimacy. Jesus knew what he was doing when he taught us to start this way, because without this foundation, the rest of the prayer cannot stand. If the Lord's Prayer begins by anchoring us in belonging and love, then what comes next builds upon that solid ground. Once you know who you are and whose you are ready to step deeper, to lift your eyes higher, and to discover what it truly means to hallow his name. The reverence of "Hallowed be your name." When Jesus taught us to say, "Hallowed be your name," he was not asking us to recite a phrase of formality, but to step into a posture of reverence that transforms how we see God and how we approach life itself. To hallow something means to set it apart, to recognize its holiness, to lift it above all else. So, when you say these words, you are not simply acknowledging that God is holy, you are aligning your heart to treat his name as sacred in every thought, every action, every word that leaves your mouth. This is not about repeating "Holy, holy, holy" without thought. It is about allowing your entire being to reflect the weight of God's holiness. Think about the power of a name. A name carries identity, authority, reputation. When you hear a name, you remember the character attached to it. Now think about the name of God. His name is more than letters. It is more than a title. It is his very essence. To say, "Hallowed be your name," is to say, "God, I recognize that everything about you is set apart, unique, unmatched, beyond comparison." It is to declare that there is no other name above his name. In a world where names compete for attention, political leaders, celebrities, brands, influencers, you choose in this moment to lift his name higher. This line of the prayer is a confrontation. It forces you to ask, whose name am I exalting in my life? Are you more concerned with your own reputation than his glory? Do you spend more energy protecting your image than honoring his name? To pray, "Hallowed be your name," is to surrender the throne of your heart and give God his rightful place. It is to admit that he is holy and you are not, that he is worthy and you are dependent, that he is above and you are under his care. This kind of humility shifts your perspective. Suddenly, life is not about building your brand or defending your pride. It is about lifting his name in everything you do. Now let's go deeper. To hallow his name is not just to declare his holiness, but to live in a way that proves you believe it. How many times have you spoken of God as holy, yet lived as though he were common? How often have you called him Lord, yet treated his commands as optional? When you hallow his name, you are saying, "God, I want my life to match my words. I want my choices to reflect your greatness. I want the way I treat people, the way I work, the way I respond to challenges to show that I honor your name above all." This is where the prayer pierces the heart, because it is easy to say, "Holy is your name." It is much harder to live it out. But this is what Jesus was teaching. The Lord's Prayer is not a collection of nice lines. It is a blueprint for living. And this part of the prayer is the moment you realign yourself. It is the moment you stop asking for what you want and start remembering who God is. Because when you see him rightly, everything else changes. Your worries shrink when you remember that his name is holy. Your pride melts when you remember that his name is above yours. Your fear fades when you remember that his name carries authority over every situation. This is why so many people have been praying this prayer wrong. They say, "Hallowed be your name," without reverence, without reflection, without conviction. They rush through it as though it were filler. But when you stop, when you feel the weight of it, when you let those words remind you of His unmatched holiness, your entire prayer life shifts. You begin to approach God with awe. You stop treating prayer as a checklist and start treating it as sacred. You begin to carry His name into your day, conscious of how every decision reflects Him. Now picture this. Every morning, before you face the noise of the world, you pause and whisper these words with intention. Hallowed be your name. You remind yourself that above every headline, every demand, every distraction, His name stands unshaken. You remind yourself that no matter what chaos waits outside your door, His holiness frames your day. You remind yourself that when you honor His name, your steps find order, your thoughts find peace, and your spirit finds strength. This one line becomes a shield, a compass, a declaration. So the next time you pray the Lord's Prayer, refuse to rush through these words. Let them ground you. Let them humble you. Let them lift your eyes above your struggles and fix them on His greatness. Because the prayer only grows in power when it begins with reverence. And once you have placed God's name where it belongs, above everything, you are ready for the next part, the boldest request of all. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your kingdom come, your will be done. When Jesus tells us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, He is calling us into one of the boldest and most transformative declarations a believer can ever make. These words are not soft or passive. They are not the polite request of someone hoping God might intervene. They are a cry for the reign of heaven to break into the reality of earth. They are a surrender of our own plans, a dethroning of our own desires, and a courageous invitation for God's order, God's justice, and God's presence to rule over every corner of our lives. Think carefully about what it means to ask for the kingdom of God to come. A kingdom is not just a place. It is a realm of authority, a way of life, a rule that shapes everything under it. To pray for God's kingdom to come is to ask for His authority to displace every rival throne. It means asking that fear no longer rule, that sin no longer dominate, that selfish ambition no longer dictate choices. It means that the atmosphere of heaven, where God's will is perfectly carried out, where His presence is constant, where His peace flows unhindered, would invade our hearts, our homes, our communities, and our world. This is no small request. It is a prayer for revolution, a prayer that rewrites reality. And then Jesus adds, your will be done. This is perhaps the hardest part for many, because to ask for God's will is to admit that ours may not align. It is to confess that His wisdom surpasses ours, that His perspective is higher than our understanding, that His timing often interrupts our plans. This line of the prayer is where the battle of control is fought. Will you cling to your will, or will you release it into His hands? To pray your will be done is to surrender pride, to silence rebellion, and to trust that even when life does not unfold as you imagined, God's plan is still good, perfect, and pleasing. But notice how Jesus frames it. On earth as it is in heaven. In heaven there is no hesitation to obey, no resistance to His word, no competition with His authority. Angels do not delay when commanded. Creation itself resonates with His glory. Everything aligns with His will. So when you say these words, you are declaring that the obedience and alignment that exists in heaven would become reality here, in the middle of your struggles, in the midst of your relationships, in the heart of your city. You are asking that the perfection of heaven's order would begin to shape your daily steps on earth. This is why these words are dangerous if prayed without conviction. Many have been saying them wrong, rushing through them without realizing the weight of what they ask. They want the comfort of God's blessings, but not the surrender of their will. They want the security of God's promises, but not the disruption of His kingdom. Yet Jesus places these words at the very heart of the prayer, because He knew that a follower of God cannot experience the fullness of heaven while clinging to the throne of self. The kingdom cannot come where self still rules. The will of God cannot be done where rebellion still resists. So the next time you pray your kingdom come, Picture what it would mean if God's kingdom truly took over your day. Imagine what your home would look like if love, patience, and peace replaced anger, resentment, and fear. Imagine your workplace reshaped by honesty, integrity, and compassion instead of rivalry and greed. Imagine your inner life free from anxiety because God's will, not your worry, ruled your heart. That is the vision of heaven touching earth. That is what you are asking for. And when you pray, "Your will be done," do not say it casually. Say it with the humility of surrender. Say it knowing that it may cost you something, but that the reward is far greater. Say it knowing that Jesus himself prayed these words in the Garden of Gethsemane when facing the agony of the cross. His example shows that surrender is not weakness, but the ultimate act of trust. When you pray this sincerely, you align yourself with the Son of God, who entrusted his life completely to the Father. This part of the Lord's Prayer is a turning point. It moves you from identity and reverence into surrender and expectation. It pulls your eyes away from temporary concerns and fixes them on eternal realities. It is the moment you step out of your small kingdom and into his unshakable one. And when you do this, the rest of the prayer unfolds with new clarity. Because only after surrendering to his kingdom and his will are you truly ready to ask for provision, forgiveness, and protection. The order matters, and Jesus knew exactly why he placed it here. So as you pray these words, do not rush. Let them challenge you. Let them confront the parts of your heart that resist surrender. Let them reshape the way you see your world, and let them remind you that when his kingdom comes and his will is done, earth begins to look a little more like heaven, and your life begins to reflect the glory of God in ways you never thought possible. Give us today our daily bread. When Jesus taught us to pray, "Give us today our daily bread," he was not simply talking about food on the table, though that is part of it. He was speaking about provision in its deepest sense. Bread represents what sustains us, what keeps us alive, what gives us strength to continue. To ask for daily bread is to admit that we are dependent, that we do not have within ourselves the power to provide everything we need. It is an act of humility, a recognition that every good gift comes from the Father above. Too often we think we are self-sufficient, that our jobs, our bank accounts, our skills are what secure us. But this line of the prayer brings us back to the truth. Without God, nothing holds. Every breath, every resource, every opportunity is a gift of his hand. Notice the word today. Jesus could have told us to pray for a year's worth of bread, for a storehouse of provisions, for a lifetime of security. Instead, he teaches us to ask for what we need right now. Why? Because faith is not about hoarding comfort for the future. It is about trusting God in the present. Daily bread teaches dependence. It teaches us to come back again tomorrow, to seek him again, to lean not on yesterday's provision, but on today's fresh mercy. This is why the Israelites were given manna in the desert one day at a time. They could not store it, could not control it, could not make it last longer than God intended. It forced them to depend on him every single day. And so it is with us. To ask for daily bread is to live with a rhythm of trust, knowing that God is faithful this morning, faithful tomorrow, faithful every day after that. But bread is more than physical food. When Jesus said, "I am the bread of life," he showed us that the deepest hunger of our souls cannot be satisfied by money, by possessions, or even by relationships. We need him. To pray for daily bread is to ask for his presence, his word, his spirit to nourish us. It is to confess that we cannot live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. How often do we chase after temporary satisfaction, filling our days with distractions, yet remain empty inside? This prayer pulls us back to the true source. It reminds us that just as our bodies weaken without food, our souls weaken without him. And do not overlook the word us. It is not "give me today my daily bread," but "give us." Jesus is shaping our hearts to care not only for ourselves, but for others. This prayer reminds us that while we ask for provision, we should also remember those who hunger, those who lack, those in need around us. It is a call to generosity, a call to compassion, a call to see the community beyond our own plate. When we pray these words with sincerity, they push us to not only receive God's provision, but to become part of His provision for others. Many people have been praying this wrong by treating it as a license for greed, asking for more than they need, trying to turn God into a vending machine for their desires. But Jesus made it clear. Daily bread is about enough, not excess. It is about sufficiency, not luxury. When you pray with this heart, you learn contentment. You learn to say, God, give me what I need today. Nothing more, nothing less. Enough to live, enough to share, enough to trust you again tomorrow. This posture changes everything. It frees you from the endless pursuit of more. It frees you from the anxiety of lack. It anchors you in the steady rhythm of divine provision. Picture waking up each morning and whispering these words not as a ritual but as a declaration of trust. You look at the day ahead with its challenges and unknowns, and you say, Father, today I will not worry about tomorrow's problems. I will not chase tomorrow's bread. I will trust you for what I need right now. Imagine how your stress would ease if you believed that God will provide at the right time, in the right way, with the right measure. Imagine how your fear would dissolve if you remembered that He has never failed to feed His children. Imagine how your life would shift if you carried gratitude instead of worry, dependence instead of pride, generosity instead of greed. This is the power of praying for daily bread. It is more than a request. It is a lifestyle of trust. It is a rhythm of dependence. It is a declaration that God is your source. And once your heart has been grounded in this truth, you are ready to face the next reality. That just as you need provision for your body and soul, you also need forgiveness for your heart. And so the prayer turns from bread to mercy, from physical need to spiritual cleansing, from the table that sustains to the grace that restores. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. When Jesus teaches us to pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, He is drawing us into one of the most humbling and confronting parts of the Lord's Prayer. These words are not a polite request for mercy. They are a direct acknowledgement of our constant need for God's grace. Every day we fall short. Every day we carry thoughts, words, and actions that miss the mark of His holiness. To pray this line is to confess that sin is real, that it stains, that it creates a debt we cannot pay back on our own. And yet in the same breath, we are reminded of the astounding truth. God is a forgiving Father who wipes clean the record of those who come to Him. His mercy is new every morning, and His grace flows without limit. But notice how Jesus ties our forgiveness from God directly to the forgiveness we extend to others. He does not allow us to separate the two. This is the difficult part. Many are eager to receive God's mercy, but slow to give it away. We want His patience, but withhold ours. We want His compassion, but hold on to grudges. Yet Jesus makes it clear, the measure of mercy we extend is tied to the measure we receive. To pray this sincerely is to place yourself under a holy challenge. It is to say, God, forgive me in the same way I forgive others. That is a sobering thought, because if we cling to bitterness, we are essentially asking God to treat us with the same hardness. This is where so many have prayed the Lord's Prayer wrong. They say the words, but refuse to release the offenses that weigh down their hearts. They recite, "Forgive us," while secretly nursing wounds of anger, betrayal, and resentment. But the power of this line is unlocked only when forgiveness flows in both directions. You cannot fully experience the joy of being forgiven if you refuse to forgive. Forgiveness is not about excusing the wrong or pretending it did not hurt. It is about releasing the burden from your soul and placing it into God's hands. It is about choosing freedom over chains, healing over bitterness, life over death. Think about what unforgiveness does. It poisons the heart. It twists the mind. It eats away at joy. It creates walls between people and even between you and God. Now think about what forgiveness does. It breaks chains. It opens doors. It allows healing to flow. It restores relationships. And even when the relationship cannot be restored, it restores peace in your own spirit. When you pray, "Forgive us as we forgive," you are stepping into a rhythm of mercy that reflects the heart of the Father. He forgave us at the greatest cost through the blood of his Son, and he now calls us to extend a fraction of that grace to others. Imagine starting your day with this prayer, not as a ritual, but as an honest reflection. You begin by asking God to cleanse your heart, to wipe away the guilt and shame of yesterday, to set you free from the weight of your failures. And then, as his mercy floods in, you allow it to wash through you and out toward those who have wronged you. You think of the person who wounded you, the betrayal you carry, the words that cut deep, and you choose, in that moment, to release it. You may not feel it instantly, but forgiveness is less about feelings and more about obedience. Each time you choose it, the grip of bitterness loosens, and the peace of God takes its place. Jesus knew this was vital because he lived it. On the cross, in the midst of unbearable suffering, he cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." If he could forgive in that moment, then surely we can forgive in ours. This line of the prayer invites us into that same radical mercy. It is not optional. It is central to the life of faith. To be forgiven is to forgive. To receive grace is to extend grace. To walk in freedom is to release others into it as well. So the next time you pray these words, pause and let them sink deep. Ask yourself honestly, is there someone I need to forgive? Is there a debt I am holding on to that I need to release? Am I willing to let God's mercy shape my relationships as much as it shapes my own soul? Because if you pray this line with sincerity, it has the power to heal wounds you thought would never close, to restore joy you thought was lost, and to bring peace you thought you could never find. And once you have tasted that kind of forgiveness, you are ready for the next cry of the prayer, the plea for strength. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. When you reach the words, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, you are stepping into a plea for protection that exposes the reality of spiritual struggle. These words remind us that life is not just about visible challenges, it is also about invisible battles. Temptation is subtle, often disguised as harmless desire or small compromise, and evil is not an abstract concept, but a force that seeks to destroy faith, peace, and joy. To pray this line is to admit that without God's guidance and strength, we are vulnerable. It is to confess that we cannot overcome by sheer willpower, that we need his hand to guide us away from danger and his power to rescue us when darkness presses in. Think about how temptation works. It rarely announces itself as something destructive. Instead, it whispers promises of pleasure, shortcuts to success, relief from pain, or validation of pride. It lures the heart with something attractive and then chains it with consequences that steal peace and joy. To pray, "Lead us not into temptation," is to acknowledge our weakness, to admit that without God's Spirit directing our steps, we are prone to fall. It is not that God himself tempts us. Scripture makes clear that he does not. But it is that we ask him to keep us away from the paths where temptation waits, to steer our choices, to guard our minds, and to set barriers that keep us safe. And then comes the plea, "Deliver us from evil." Here the prayer sharpens into warfare. Evil is real. It is active. It does not sleep. The enemy of our souls seeks to kill, steal, and destroy. To pray this line is to raise a shield against that attack, to call on the deliverer who has already conquered evil through the cross and resurrection. It is to place yourself under the covering of his victory, asking him to rescue you not only from external harm, but from the schemes that aim at your spirit. These words are a cry for divine intervention, for the power of God to surround you when your own strength would collapse. This part of the prayer confronts us with a truth many do not want to face. We are in a battle. Every day there are unseen forces pulling at our thoughts, our decisions, our desires. To pray these words daily is to remind yourself that you cannot fight alone. It is to clothe yourself in humility and seek the armor of God, asking for his Spirit to guide your steps and guard your heart. This is not fear speaking, but wisdom. For the believer who pretends the battle is not real will fall the quickest. The believer who acknowledges weakness and calls for help will stand strong. Many people have prayed this line wrong. treating it as a vague request without weight. They say the words without urgency, forgetting that temptation is waiting at the door and evil is prowling like a lion. But when you pray it with understanding, you are drawing a boundary around your life. You are saying, God, I cannot trust my strength alone. I need you to guide me away from the snares, to break the traps of the enemy, to deliver me when I am surrounded. That kind of prayer builds vigilance, builds humility, builds dependence. Imagine how different your day would be if you began it with this awareness. Before stepping into conversations, decisions, and pressures, you call out, "Lead me not into temptation." Suddenly you are alert to the moments where compromise knocks at the door, where impatience wants to explode, where pride wants to rise. And in those moments you sense God's Spirit redirecting you, nudging you toward wisdom. And when you feel overwhelmed, when discouragement presses in, you whisper, "Deliver me from evil," and remember that the power of God is greater than anything set against you. This creates a shield of confidence, a peace that even when the world shakes, you are not defenseless. This line is not meant to produce fear but faith. It reminds you that though the battle is real, the victory belongs to the Lord. When you pray this daily, you are not begging for scraps of protection. You are standing under the covering of the Almighty. You are declaring that evil does not have the final word, temptation does not dictate your story, and weakness does not define your life. God does. His guidance, His deliverance, His power. And when you live in this awareness, your prayers become stronger, your steps more guarded, your faith more resilient. This line of the Lord's Prayer anchors you in spiritual reality and empowers you to walk with confidence. And once you understand it, you are ready for the closing movement of the prayer, the declaration of glory and authority. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. The closing words of the Lord's Prayer rise like a final anthem, sealing everything that came before. When you say, "For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever," you are not adding a polite ending. You are declaring a victory statement. These words are a proclamation of faith, an acknowledgement that the prayer you just prayed rests on the unshakable authority of God. They remind you that what you ask for is not rooted in your strength or your control, but in His eternal reign. This is the exclamation point of the prayer, lifting your eyes once again from your needs to His sovereignty. When you declare yours is the kingdom, you are recognizing that all rule and authority belong to God. It is not your kingdom, not the kingdom of your career, not the kingdom of politics, not the kingdom of human achievement. It is His. This acknowledgement dismantles pride. It forces you to remember that no matter how much control you think you hold, there is only one throne, and it belongs to Him. When you live with this awareness, you stop clinging so tightly to temporary empires and start investing in the eternal. You see your choices differently. You measure success differently. You realize that only what serves His kingdom truly lasts. Then you say, "Yours is the power." This is a reminder that God is not only King in name, but King in action. His power sustains the universe, upholds your life, and carries authority over every circumstance. Too often we pray while secretly doubting God's ability to act. We limit Him in our minds, treating Him as if He were bound by our circumstances. But these words reframe everything. When you declare His power, you are admitting that no sickness, no struggle, no enemy, no fear stands above Him. His power is unmatched, unchallenged, and unending. This gives your prayer confidence. You are not sending words into the void. You are addressing the Almighty who can and will act according to His will. And then you finish with, "Yours is the glory forever." Glory is the weight of God's presence, the radiance of His being, the beauty of His holiness displayed. To declare that the glory belongs to Him forever is to place your life within the larger story of eternity. It reminds you that the purpose of prayer is not just to meet your needs, but to magnify His name. Everything circles back to His glory. When your prayer ends here, it places you in the right posture. God exalted, self-humbled, creation aligned with the Creator. This perspective fills you with awe. because you realize that even your requests are part of a bigger story designed to glorify Him. This ending is more than words. It is a declaration of alignment. Every line of the prayer has been leading here: identity in our Father, reverence in hallowed be your name, surrender in your kingdom come, dependence in give us our daily bread, mercy in forgive us, protection in deliver us from evil. And now it all culminates in this anthem of praise: yours is the kingdom, the power, the glory. This is where the prayer takes your eyes completely off yourself and places them fully on God. That shift is what strengthens faith. That shift is what sustains hope. That shift is what fills your heart with peace. Many have been praying this closing wrong because they rush through it, treating it like a signature at the end of a letter. But if you slow down, if you let the words echo in your spirit, you feel their weight. You realize that you are declaring eternal truth. These words are not a conclusion. They are a victory cry. They remind you that God's reign is unending, His power unshakable, His glory unmatched. And when you end your prayer with this perspective, you step into your day with courage. You walk forward knowing that whatever you face is under His authority. Imagine how your life would change if you carried this declaration beyond the prayer. In every challenge, whisper, yours is the kingdom. In every fear, declare, yours is the power. In every success, confess, yours is the glory. Suddenly, everything aligns differently. Anxiety loosens its grip because you remember who rules. Pride fades because you remember whose glory matters. Doubt diminishes because you remember whose power is at work. This ending is not just words, it is a framework for living, a reminder that everything starts and ends with Him. And with that, the Lord's Prayer closes, not as a ritual to be finished, but as a revelation to be lived. Each line has carried you deeper into intimacy, reverence, surrender, dependence, forgiveness, protection, and worship. Together they form not just a prayer to recite, but a way of life to embrace. The Lord's Prayer as a blueprint for daily living. When you step back and look at the Lord's Prayer as a whole, you begin to see that Jesus was not simply giving us words to repeat, but a structure to shape our entire lives. Each line builds upon the other like stones in a foundation, and together they form a spiritual blueprint. It begins with identity, reminding you who God is and who you are in relation to Him. It then moves into reverence, teaching you to approach Him with awe. It calls for surrender, urging you to place His will above your own. It invites dependence, showing you that daily provision comes from His hand. It requires mercy, asking you to both receive and extend forgiveness. It confronts the reality of spiritual battle, training you to seek protection. And it closes with a declaration of eternal authority, grounding your life in His kingdom, His power, and His glory. This is why Jesus said, "Pray like this." He was not commanding empty ritual. He was laying down a rhythm for how to live. To pray the Lord's Prayer with understanding is to allow it to reframe the way you think, speak, act, and respond. It takes prayer from the realm of habit and pulls it into the realm of transformation. This is where so many have misunderstood it. They repeat the words without realizing that every line is a doorway into a deeper way of living. They pray it in minutes and then forget it in practice. But Jesus intended it to be more than a prayer for the lips. He intended it to be a pattern for the heart. Think about what happens if you let this blueprint guide your day. You start your morning with, Our Father, remembering you are not alone, not forgotten, not rejected. You carry reverence into your thoughts as you whisper, Hallowed be your name, lifting Him above everything else. When you face decisions, you remind yourself, Your kingdom come, your will be done, surrendering your plans into His. When you worry about provision, you pray, Give us today our daily bread, trusting Him for what is enough. When conflict arises, you breathe, Forgive us our debts, releasing mercy. When temptation comes, you cry out, Deliver us from evil, remembering your weakness and His strength. And when the day closes, you end with a declaration, Yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Suddenly, your entire life is framed by prayer, anchored in truth, guided by surrender, and covered in worship. This is not a blueprint for perfection, but for alignment. It does not mean every day will be free of trouble or that every prayer will be answered the way you imagine. What it means is that you live inside a structure that keeps you steady no matter what storms come. When you are anchored in identity, reverence, surrender, dependence, forgiveness, protection, and praise, you are less shaken by uncertainty and more rooted in God's reality. The Lord's Prayer becomes less about repetition and more about rhythm. It is the rhythm of heaven beating in your heart on earth. This is why the enemy fears when believers pray this with understanding. Empty repetition holds no threat, but a heart aligned with this blueprint is dangerous to darkness. It is a heart that knows who it belongs to, who it serves, who it trusts, and who it glorifies. That kind of heart cannot be easily swayed by fear, temptation, or pride. That kind of heart carries the fragrance of heaven into every conversation, every decision, every moment. So as you pray these words, do not treat them as ritual, but as revelation. Let them form the scaffolding of your day. Let them structure the way you live. Let them shift your perspective so that your life is not built on sand, but on the solid foundation of Christ's teaching. The Lord's Prayer is short enough to memorize in childhood, but deep enough to shape a lifetime. It is simple enough for anyone to say, yet powerful enough to reorder nations if truly embraced. And this is where we see the genius of Jesus' teaching. In a few lines, he gave us a blueprint that is timeless, cross-cultural, unshakable. The more you live by it, the more you realize it was never meant to stay on the page but to be written into your actions, your attitudes, your words, and your choices. This is the invitation he extends, not just to pray differently, but to live differently. And when you step into that rhythm, you begin to taste what it means for earth to reflect heaven, breaking the habit of empty repetition. One of the greatest dangers in prayer is that it becomes routine, words repeated without heart, phrases spoken without thought. The Lord's Prayer is especially vulnerable to this because it is so well known, recited in churches, whispered in rituals, taught to children, repeated at ceremonies. And yet, Jesus never intended it to become a script that loses its meaning. He gave it as a living pattern, a heartbeat of relationship with the Father. When you pray it by habit alone, you strip it of power. When you allow it to become mechanical, you turn something meant to be alive into something hollow. And this is why many believers have been praying it wrong. They say the words but do not pause to let those words penetrate their hearts. They repeat syllables but do not live the truths behind them. Think about how often people recite this prayer with their lips while their minds are elsewhere, distracted by tasks, burdens, or boredom. In those moments, the prayer becomes background noise, like a song playing in the distance, never engaging the soul. But Jesus was clear. Prayer is not about heaping up empty phrases. It is about connecting with the living God. The Lord's Prayer is not meant to be chanted without thought, but to be prayed with understanding, with reflection, with reverence. If each line is a doorway, then empty repetition is like walking past the doors without ever stepping through. So how do you break the habit of empty repetition? It begins with awareness. Slow down. Refuse to rush. When you say, "Our Father," stop and think about the intimacy of those words. When you whisper, "Hallowed be your name," lift him above your circumstances. When you say, "Your kingdom come," surrender your will in that moment. Each phrase deserves your focus, your surrender, your faith. Prayer is not about how many words you can say, but how deeply those words shape you. Breaking repetition is about depth over speed, presence over performance. Another key is to personalize the prayer. Jesus gave us a model, not a cage. As you pray, let the words open into conversation. When you ask for daily bread, name your needs, bring your worries, thank Him for what He has already provided. When you ask for forgiveness, confess honestly, release what you've been carrying, and extend mercy to those who hurt you. When you ask for deliverance from evil, speak to the specific battles you face, whether in thought, temptation, or fear. This is how the prayer stays alive, when it becomes dialogue, not monologue, when it becomes encounter, not ritual. Imagine the difference if every time you prayed the Lord's Prayer you did so slowly, intentionally, thoughtfully. Imagine starting your day not with a rush to get through the words, but with a pause to savor each truth. Imagine finishing the prayer, not feeling that you fulfilled an obligation, but sensing that you touched heaven and heaven touched you. That is the power of breaking repetition and stepping into revelation. This shift will also transform the way you experience other prayers. When you stop treating prayer as duty and begin treating it as relationship, everything changes. You pray with expectancy. You pray with passion. You pray with a sense of presence. The Lord's Prayer is a guide into that reality, but only if you refuse to let it become a lifeless chant. So the challenge is clear. Do not let familiarity breed emptiness. Do not let a prayer that carries eternity in its lines become a shallow whisper on your lips. Break the habit of repetition and step into the rhythm of revelation. Let each word carry weight. Let each phrase draw you closer. Let each moment be filled with awareness that you are speaking to the God who hears, who responds, who moves. This is how you pray the Lord's Prayer the way Jesus intended. And once you taste this depth, you will never want to go back to shallow repetition again. Living the Lord's Prayer beyond the words. The Lord's Prayer does not end when you say Amen. In fact, that is when it begins. Its purpose is not simply to shape the moments you spend with your eyes closed, but to shape the way you walk, think, and act when your eyes open again. Each line carries power only if it flows from prayer into practice. To call God our Father is to walk through your day with the assurance that you are His child, not abandoned, not forgotten. To say, "Hallowed be your name," is to live in a way that honors Him in every choice, every word, every thought. To declare your kingdom come is to align your decisions with His priorities, seeking justice, mercy, and truth even when the world pushes against it. To ask for daily bread is to depend on Him for strength in every step, not only in theory, but in the way you face challenges and trust Him with provision. Forgiveness cannot stay in prayer alone. It must become a posture of life. Each time you say, "Forgive us as we forgive," you are choosing to release bitterness, choosing to extend mercy, choosing to walk lighter than the world expects. Deliverance is not simply protection from spiritual forces. It is vigilance in your choices, awareness of the traps that pull you away from God, and reliance on His Spirit to guide you. And when you end with, "Yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory," it is not just an ending phrase, but a declaration that every victory, every success, every blessing belongs to Him. This attitude of worship changes how you see everything. Living the Lord's Prayer means embodying its truths when no one is watching. It means pausing in the middle of conflict to remember the call to forgive. It means calming anxiety by recalling that God provides daily bread. It means finding courage in temptation by whispering, "Deliver me from evil." It means choosing humility when pride wants recognition because you remember that the glory belongs to Him alone. When this prayer shapes your daily responses, it becomes more than words. It becomes life. The tragedy is that many stop at the surface. They repeat the prayer in church or in private, but never let it transform their daily choices. They know it by memory, but not by practice. Yet Jesus never taught it for ritual. He gave it for rhythm. A rhythm of dependence, a rhythm of surrender, a rhythm of mercy, a rhythm of worship. If you allow this rhythm to govern your day, it becomes impossible to pray it wrong, because the prayer is no longer just spoken, it is lived. Imagine the impact if you carried this prayer into your family, your work, your community. Imagine relationships restored because you chose forgiveness. Imagine anxiety lifted because you trusted for daily provision. Imagine faith strengthened because you remembered that God's kingdom is unshakable. Imagine a life lived not in empty repetition, but in living revelation. This is what Jesus offered when He gave us these words. A prayer that would outlast generations, simple enough for a child to learn, deep enough to guide a lifetime, powerful enough to reshape the world if truly embraced. The Lord's Prayer was never meant to be a cage of memorized lines. It was meant to be a doorway into a transformed life. And now the choice is yours. Will you recite it as routine, or will you live it as revelation? If you choose revelation, every time you pray it, the words will breathe new life into you, guiding you into intimacy with the Father, shaping your heart after His will, and filling your steps with His power and His glory. This is how you stop praying the Lord's Prayer wrong and begin living it right. beyond the words, into the life it was always meant to create.